monster! Ooh!
80s nostalgia has been in vogue for almost as long as the 80s decade itself lasted. That's not a bad thing by any means. Some really cool stuff has come out of that craze, like Stranger Things, a ton of great horror movies, and even some book and video game throwbacks. Speaking of Stranger Things, I think it's safe to say that we wouldn't have that ratings powerhouse without a little movie from 1987 called The Monster Squad. Not Monster Squad, the 1976 TV series about wax figures of monsters that come to life to fight bad guys, although the guest stars they pulled on that are pretty fun. No, I'm talking about The Monster Squad. A group of horror-obsessed kids that team up and battle monsters to save their small town and the world. Many of us grew up with this gem, but nearly 40 years later, does it stand the test of time?
He's gonna kill your son!
2 ways to kill a werewolf.
Silver bullet?
And?
That's it. Shoot him with a silver bullet.
Nope, sorry, Rudy.
Okay, so what's the other way?
We're the Monster Squad.
The Monster Squad is the second part of what I refer to the double-decker, with the first one being Night of the Creeps. Sure, Fred Dekker almost wrote and directed RoboCop 3, but these two movies are actually good. While it was already more than an idea in his head, there is an amazing Easter egg in Night of the Creeps when one of the lead characters is in a bathroom stall and on the wall next to him is written, "Go Monster Squad." What would have been even better would have been a throwaway line about anything from the movie. But alas, we just have a similar line read and scene about dead guys do not get up and walk away by themselves.
Corpses that have been dead for 27 years do not get up and walk away by themselves.
Followed by showing a dead guy getting up and walking away. The movie was released on August 14th, 1987, and was an absolute bomb. It had a budget of $14 million and made less than $4 at the box office. It has since become quite the cult film with more popularity than it could have ever hoped for in the late 80s. The film has a fun cast that includes Andre Gower, Ashley Bank, Robbie Kiger, Ryan Lambert, Brent Chalem, and Michael Faustino as the main Monster Squad. The supporting cast of adults and monsters includes genre favorites Tom Noonan and Stephen Mocht, as well as Duncan Regier, John Grise, and Stephen Shaw. The script was co-written by 80s wonderkin Shane Black, and the special effects were handled by the Stan Winston Studio. They were tasked with bringing all these classic monsters together, but had to make them different though. Frankenstein's monster couldn't look like the Boris Karloff iteration, the Wolfman wouldn't look like Lon Chaney, etc. Basically, nothing could look like anything from the Universal Jack Pierce days. Even the stand-in for the creature from the Black Lagoon was simply titled Gilman and looked different enough. While there had been a fair amount of Dracula, Frankenstein, and werewolf movies through the decades, we hadn't seen them all on screen like this since House of Dracula or the Abbott and Costello films of the late 1940s. Although it's been shared before, this is absolutely one of the first examples of an Avengers-like shared universe some 65 years before the Avengers. It's also very frustrating that Marvel showed us how to do it right in modern movie making, and it was so monumentally screwed up in the proposed Dark Universe. The movie runs in at under 90 minutes and has no dragging parts. It opens 100 years in the past, or 100 years before 1987 anyway, where Van Helsing and a few other determined heroes corner Dracula and his creature friends in order to rid the world of his menace. This scene was written as a ridiculous action set piece involving zeppelins and hundreds of men on horseback storming Dracula's castle. Considering how badly the movie bombed, the amount of money that would have taken could have bankrupted the production company. Van Helsing is able to banish Dracula and his monster cronies into a portal, but not permanently. We then get transported to modern times, or at least modern for the movie, and we get to meet the titular Monster Squad. We get Rudy, Horace, Sean, and Patrick as they navigate life in school. There's also the younger sister Phoebe, who they call Phoebe the Phoebe. The face she makes is exactly how my daughter looks when her brother makes fun of her, and it breaks my heart a little. Dracula gets Frankenstein's monster out of a plane, and a lunatic claiming to be a werewolf wants to get locked up but is shot instead.
Right on.
Across town, Sean's cop dad is investigating a break-in and theft at the museum where the mummy walked away. The supposed dead guy turns into the werewolf he warned them about and kills the ambulance driver. We then get the other Monster Squad together, with Dracula, the Wolfman, the Mummy, the Gillman, and Frankenstein's monster. Sean starts to worry about monsters being real after hearing about all the stuff that had happened with his dad the previous night, and decides that they're the ones that have to do something about it. He has Van Helsing's diary, but they can't read it because it's all in German. Dracula sins. Look, I'm not saying Frankenstein's monster 10 more times here, so he's the monster now. So he sends the monster after the diary, and the kids have their scary German neighbor translate it. The monster fails spectacularly and ends up befriending the group while scary German guy, who is indeed bitchin', explains the process that can either seal evil away forever or allow them to rule. Dracula finds the amulet, and the kids go into full training montage to prepare and stop him. They collect supplies and make a game plan to destroy the monsters once and for all. Dracula is prepping too and turns a few girls into his vampire brides. Half the team goes to the house with the amulet, while the other two find the virgin they need to read the incantation. The monster is crushed when the ceiling collapses, and we find out that Wolfmen indeed do have nards.
Wolfman's got nard.
They flee from the Count, his brides, and the Wolfman before meeting up with everyone else, including scary German guy who is on the team now too. They dispose of the mummy and head for the town church to complete the ritual while Dracula blows up the treehouse with dynamite, as well as Sean's dad's partner. The monsters and the squad converge at the church at the same time to sort out good versus evil. Sean's dad is there too, and the battle begins. Rudy takes out the vampire brides while Sean and his dad go after Dracula and blow up the Wolfman, who of course puts himself back together. Rudy, a certified badass at this point after staking the brides and unraveling the mummy, shoots the werewolf with a silver bullet. Horace kills the Gillman and gets some respect finally, but unfortunately the virgin they found is anything but.
Well, Steve, but he doesn't count! Doesn't count!
Phoebe steps in and recites it perfectly to open the portal after the monster stands up to Dracula and throws him on a spiked gate. Dracula tries to take Sean into the portal with him, but is staked for good this time, and Van Helsing pulls him into the portal himself to seal the deal. Squad 1, Monster 0. Well, we've talked about things like clothes and cars and the vernacular of the era, and sure, that's all here. One that I want to touch on is the very club or squad that is the centerpiece of the movie. The parents let the kids out whenever they want for an indeterminate amount of time, and while that itself is a relic of the past, I'm talking more about going out and doing something. If this was taking place in 2023, these kids wouldn't be out playing together. They would more than likely be playing on the ever-coveted devices, smartphones, tablets, and any number of computer and video game systems.
Bogus.
Video game systems, and sure, tire handheld electronics were around 30 and almost 40 years ago, but there weren't as many options and it wasn't as big of a thing as it is now. I was a big video game kid, growing up at the peak of the NES, but also I went out daily to play basketball or hang out with buddies. The other one that stands out is near and dear to my heart. Sean and his dad discuss going to the 12th iteration of a slasher series called Groundhog's Day. This alone is incredible as it's poking fun at the decade's obsession with slasher killers, and we need a Groundhog series. When they end up watching it together, it's via a drive-in. Well, it's a really cool matte painting of a drive-in, but they're watching it from their roof. Drive-ins hit their peak in popularity in the 50s and 60s, but still had some pull in the 80s. While they exist in some fashion today, their numbers have dwindled and their popularity isn't as mainstream as it once was. Another cool part of this is Decker's previous movie, Night of the Creeps, had some cool 1950s flashbacks and had scenes that could have been taken out of a movie in that era. File this under nearly everything. This movie rules, and it fits so much charm into its rather short runtime. Rather than go over everything line by line of what works, we'll single out just a few.
He had to wear pants because those movies were made in the 40s. He had to wear them so you wouldn't see his wolf dork.
The performances, yeah, even the kids, all stand out and never get into that awful, cringe-worthy zone. They all get great lines too, from Fat Kid turning into a confident Horace after killing the Gill Man.
Hey, Fat Kid. Good job.
My name is Horace.
To Phoebe being the most brave at times and calling them chicken shits.
Come on, don't be chicken shit.
And Rudy protecting them and saying, I'm a part of the club, ain't I?
Where you going, Rudy?
I'm in the goddamn club, aren't I?
And that's just with the kids. With the exception of Sean's mom, who isn't really in enough to make an impact, everyone else has great moments, lines, and character growth. John Grise, as the Wolfman, is a single-minded killer that takes his orders from Dracula. But in his human form, he wants to die, but also help the other humans of the town get ahead of what's coming.
No doubt. No doubt in my mind.
Tom Noonan kills it as Frankenstein's monster, both with his nonverbal acting Don't tell me you don't cry every time he gets sucked into the portal, and with his few lines of dialogue. Sean's dad is a good cop, but also works with his son instead of denying or just telling him to stay out of things. Finally, there's Dracula. Ever since I saw The Horror of Dracula, I've been on Team Christopher Lee as the Count, but Duncan Regehr, kills it here. Granted, he didn't have the amount of screen appearances as Lugosi or Lee as Old Vlad, but he makes it count here. Sorry, that one was actually unintentional. The other thing that holds up remarkably well here are the special effects. Sure, practical effects always tend to stand the test of time, but the ones here are particularly stellar. The creature makeup and effects had to skirt the line of not being too similar to Jack Pierce and the Universal classics, but they are their own thing and they are absolutely wonderful. From the not too intensive work in Dracula and His Brides, to the full body changes of the Wolfman and legally distinct non-copyright infringing monster from an adjacent pond, they all look great. Then you have the other effects like the mummy unraveling, the Wolfman changing and blowing up, and even Dracula in a state of mid-change from bat to man when he is shot out of the sky. While it's not quite as amazing as American Werewolf in London, it's still pretty damn good. When looking at it with the fan's eye, nothing. There's nothing here that doesn't hold up. It's a movie that is firmly stuck in its time while also being timeless. Looking at it through a critical lens only finds a few kinks in the armor. With a runtime of 82 minutes, it doesn't really have a lot of time to develop its characters or their stories to the fullest extent. The divorce situation with Sean's parents is brought up but never resolved. There isn't any background on the villains besides Dracula, and even that is a basic outline of vampire bad, Van Helsing good. While this doesn't change the level of enjoyment that the film has, it makes the plot paper thin and still tries to meander a bit. This also leads to the other slight drawback, and that's what we needed more. More monsters, more squad, and more movie in general. There was never a sequel, remake, or TV show. An idea like this today is getting a limited 8-episode series on Hulu or the full 5-season arc on Netflix a la Stranger Things. Monster Squad stands the test of time like a fine aged wine. It's something that plays homage to horror of the past and puts kids in the hero role without sacrificing the enjoyment for adults. It's a case of the movie being enjoyable today for all the reasons that probably led it to being a massive flop at the time of its release. It's a movie to watch alone, with friends, and is a wonderful gateway horror for younger audiences. It's almost a sequel to the Universal set 40 years after they came out, and is still great after nearly 40 years after its own release. We are all on the Monster Squad.
We're the Monster Squad.